All right, so we'll start now. Welcome everyone. So this afternoon's PD, my name is Sandra DeBarber. So myself, I'm a teacher of the deaf. I'm involved in the AATD SA committee, the PD committee. So I would like to acknowledge the country. I acknowledge that the training this afternoon is happening on the traditional lands of the Ghana people and Adelaide Aboriginal group. I respect the elders past and present and the future emerging. I acknowledge the deaf leaders, past and present, and the future as well. So AATD SA means the Australian Association of the Teachers of the Deaf. We, here in South Australia, we advocate and support for deaf and hard of hearing children and students. So for more information, you've got the website www.aaTDSA.org.au. Thank you for joining online today. So we have this is going to be recorded and you can access it later. Sorry, I'm looking up and down, sorry. So if any feedback, please submit it through the website. Please post your name and let us know through email if you would like the recording and to receive your certificate at the end. If you want to ask questions, type them in the chat box or the chat room. We've got someone monitoring it so we can receive your questions and answer them in due time. We've got a sound field system. So this room will have a microphone that's passed around if needed to ask questions. So thank you to those who travelled to come here today. Thank you for signing in. If you haven't done that now, there's a form at the front of the room. The toilets are just outside. Emergency exit. Just follow the signs to outside. Let me know as well if you would not like to be in the photos. Just let me know so that I can make those changes. And thank you for following social distancing as well. Any feedback, please go through the AATD SA website. This session is number 4:30 to 5:30. So now I'm going to introduce Claire. So Claire Loads has worked for many years, 41 years, in the education department. She started teaching in 1978 as a mainstream teacher. She then moved over into deaf education in 1987 as a graduate ToD. Graduated in 1990. And then she moved on to Armata as the principal. Thank you. So Claire is still involved in the AATD and helping with preparation for deaf and hard of hearing students. She's had many different positions in the AATD committee and as the National Association of Teachers of the Deaf. So currently she is the president of South Australia. In 2015, Claire was given a life membership for South Australia. And in 2018, she received Des Power Award. We really appreciate Claire coming today. And please welcome Claire now into the round of applause. Thank you.
Just got to get out of the way of the light. Okay, can people see me online at home? Yes. All right, so today we're going to talk about the professional standards for teachers and how you can use the standards to hold up. Pardon? Oh, you're lagging behind everybody, Heather.
The internet.
It's not you, it's the internet.
That's much better now.
Yeah, it's better now. Okay, so we're going to talk about how you can use the standards and the NAATD elaborations to improve your practice. The first thing, though, presume this just works as normal, does it? Yep. Okay. There are 5. You've got to give yourself a score out of 5. 1, I've never heard of the elaborations document. 2, I've seen the elaborations and standards documents. 3, I use the elaboration and standards document to reflect my practice. 4, I use the standards for feedback on my practice. And 5, I use the standards to support my professional learning and for feedback on my practice. All right, I want you to be honest. Have a look and say, where would you hit? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Put your hand up.
This is the standards on the teacher of the day.
Yeah. And people online can, have a look too and see where you think you'd fit as well.
Type your number in the chat.
Type your number in the chat. Okay, so we've got people who use it in different ways. Okay, let's see how we go. This is well, I've got the piece of paper because I can't read the screen because it was in the way.
From Leah Russell.
Okay. All right, so the AITSL standards for teachers outline for all of us what teachers should know and be able to do, and there are 4 career stages. So you've got the graduate stage, you have the proficient, the highly accomplished, and the leads. The teacher, the deaf elaborations are based on the AITSL standards, but they are specific to the skills needed by teachers of the deaf. So they describe what the National Committee, at the time they started developing them, which was probably about 2014, 15, 16, what they thought was important for teachers of the deaf to know. The elaborations don't take the place of the AITSL standards, they need to be used together. So if you're a graduate, for a teacher of the deaf, it's someone who's finished their training, right? If you're a graduate teacher of the deaf, it's about you coming out of your training. If you are a graduate teacher, it is coming out of your training as well. So if you look at the first 2 levels of the standards, they are actually all about knowledge, because they are the things you need to know, rather than when you get to the proficient stage, they are things you should be able to do. So you need to keep that in mind. And you may be, for some of you who have been working a really long time, be highly accomplished or a lead teacher. But the focus of the graduate stage is on, when you look at the teacher of the deaf stuff, and you look at the graduate stage, that's the stuff we expect as an association for teachers to know about. So last year we looked at the universities and what they were doing, training teachers of the deaf, and then mapped what they were doing against our standards to see that they were covering all of those things. Really? Yeah, most of them. Most of them didn't. I went too far. So, well, people can lie. And what you say you do and what you actually do is not always the same, right? What teachers put on their program is not always what happens in the classroom. So and that's same thing happens in universities, I'm sure. So the elaborations, were never printed as a document. They were made with the cooperation of AITSL though. So we did negotiate with AITSL and they gave us funding towards the getting them professionally put together as a document. They're available now on both the AATD SA website and the NAATD website, but they were developed to define the knowledge and the skills and abilities of teachers of the deaf. But you do need to use them in collaboration with the AITSL standards. So, one of the first things you probably should do is join AITSL. Go to the AITSL website, have a look at the standards because they're for all teachers, right? And if you're going to ever go for highly accomplished or lead teachers, you really need to understand the AITSL standards because they're the standards they will use to actually put you through the process. And I know when I did the assessor training, there was a woman there who actually worked at Gordon Education Centre in Mount Gambier, and she'd actually got her lead teacher status, but it was through the AITSL standards, you don't have standards for every specific category. We just as an association thought it was important to make sure we had a way to describe what teachers of the deaf should be doing. So there is an assessment process for highly accomplished and lead teachers, and that's to keep teachers in the classroom, good quality teachers in the classroom, because most of them go out into leadership because of the fact that there are no, the money is better in leadership. Not necessarily worth it, but the money is better. But with support services staff, I actually think you should be looking at highly accomplished and lead, because your salary level would put you at the same level as a highly accomplished or lead teacher. And it's all about how you influence others, not just what you do in the classroom. So I would be looking there and going, maybe this is where I need to be looking. Does that make sense? Okay, so the elaborations document is made up of the standard. The standard 2 is know the content and how to teach. And so if you moved along from the graduate to the proficient, in the graduate, you're going to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of the effects of the demands of language underpinning vocabulary. But, oh, why? You sound like my mother, Alison. Years ago, I gave a talk at the deaf community, and Mum sat in the front row going, slow down, the interpreter can't keep up. But if you're at the proficient, you're actually applying the knowledge. Okay? And when you get to highly accomplished, you're actually supporting colleagues using your current knowledge and understanding. And when you get to lead, you're leading initiatives in the school or in the setting that you're working. So can you see how the verbs are changing as you move from one level of the standard to the next? All right?
Does this still apply to applying for step 9?
Step 9 is a completely different process. Step 9 was introduced originally to give people another step after step 8, right? And you had to fill in this huge documentation. If you look at the step 9 process, you actually have to be able to describe how you work with others, right? The issue around step 9 is there's a whole lot of people who don't think it should ever happen because people just put in that. And when somebody says, no, I'm not signing it, then there's a whole lot of issues happen. So this is highly accomplished and lead is different because it's a much more process. Whereas step 9 sometimes depends on who's signing the paper.
And there's AST2.
AST2
finished this year.
Yeah, because AST, when you were an advanced skills teacher, you went through a very similar process to highly accomplished or lead, whereas they were for 5-year tenures, set tenures, and so then they dropped them back. But if I hadn't retired and didn't get another lead principal's job, then my fallback was going to be an AST, right? Because you have to have a fallback, and after you've been so long in a principal's job, you have a fallback to an AST. So it's still there as a classification, but yeah, the process isn't there. Highly accomplished and lead is the process the department uses. So if you have a look at the AITSL standard, you will see it has the same thing. You've got, this has got domain as well though, because it's got professional knowledge, the standard, and then a descriptor. But there's also illustrations, so you can have a look. Click on the illustrations and it will take you to video, to documents, to have a look about what it actually means. And if you're going for highly accomplished or lead, and you want to, so it gives you some idea, because if you're going for highly accomplished and lead, you need a big document like this, just about, and you've got to be prepared for people to come and watch you teach over a period of time. All right, so one of the things I would suggest you do is use the AITSL self-assessment tool, right? It's an online tool that you can actually situate yourself, your practice, within the standards. What's wrong?
We've just had some feedback from home that occasionally our internet is causing our interpreter here to also be frozen on screen for the people at home.
And
so
Sarah's at home.
if those people are missing anything, I've just asked them to let us know so that we can pause for a second to catch up.
It is recorded. Yeah.
And it's captioned, so she can swap to the captions if there's a phrase.
Which one is actually?
I think maybe this
That one. I know.
Working?
Well, we could. I had to put shut herself off.
She's off.
Okay, are we?
by the end of the night.
All right.
We'll get it right.
Yeah, I know.
And at least most of us know each other. It's not, for me the one. We'll get it ready by the next.
Yeah, that's right. How many leaders are going to need interpreters?
No.
No.
So by the time we get it right, we won't have anyone.
Yeah.
Sandra's not registered.
She's not registered.
But she might watch the recording, so.
Okay. Alrighty, so as I was saying, the AITSL self-assessment tool is a really useful tool, okay? You do have to be honest with yourself, alright? Years ago, we had some graduate teachers who actually did it while I was at Wilson. They were coming in off the land. Anyway, they saw themselves all at, leading. But anyway, they thought they were really good. But there you go. So, but I suggest if you're going to do it, you keep the elaborations documents with you, so you can actually look at and go, okay, this is what it means for me as a teacher of the deaf. So you can actually bring that in there, and it will help you identify the areas you need for your own further development. And it's a formative tool, right? And it's for you. It is not for the leader, but it is for you to have a look and see where you want to improve. And that's why you need to be honest, right? Because it's not about your self-improvement. It's not about saying I'm wonderful. Okay? Sometimes we need to do that, but most times this is about, how can I improve? So, classroom practice, it happens when our teaching and learning is visible. So when others can see what we're doing, then we will improve our practice. It improves when we collaborate with colleagues and when we work with colleagues. It improves when we observe each other teach and when we receive regular feedback. So, continuous improvement as a teacher is really important. You can choose to teach for 30 years, or you can choose to teach for 1 year 30 times. And right? And there are some teachers who do that, right? They teach for 1 year and do it 30 times over and over again. So you're going to do a disservice to yourself and to the kids you work with if you choose to teach for 1 year 30 times. All right? And we only improve when we observe each other and we collaborate with each other and work with each other. So, the professional practice domain, which is standard 3, 4 and 5, articulate what good teachers do in their classrooms. All right? They tell us what good teaching looks like. It is not me going in and observing Leanne and going, well, I didn't do it that way, so I don't think what she's doing is a good job. Right? It's actually about me going, yes, I can see this happening in the classroom. So it isn't, when I first became a leader, I had an idea of what good practice looked like, but I didn't have anything that said this is good practice. It's much easier now to go in and do an observation and sit down and have a look at it and say, yes, I can see somebody doing this and I can see somebody doing that. And it might be not the way I did it, but they're still doing it. And so it is what is good teaching practice, not what I personally think is good teaching practice. Because I'm never wrong, but you never know. All right? And it is important that we have it defined and that we don't guess. Okay? And it's not about just having specific programs, because just having a specific program is not necessarily just good teaching practice as well. So when we look at standards 3, 4 and 5, there are a few things that are missing from them because they've been removed. And so when you have, so this is in clearer detail what standard 3, 4 and 5 look like. So standard 5 is about assessing student learning, providing feedback to students on their learning and making consistent and comparable judgments. And so, you know, what are we doing? How are you assessing kids' learning? How do you feedback to them? How do you tell them about what they're going to learn and about why they're learning it? Because that's really, really important. And so, and some of us do it better than others, right? I used to always visit classrooms, which is a really important thing when you're a leader. But I remember going to one class and saying to the kids, what are we doing today? Well, we're learning about verbs. And why are we doing this? Oh, because Miss O'Day told us we needed to. You know? And I went down to a 1-2 class and I said, what are we learning? What are we doing today? We're practicing adding to 5. Why are we practicing adding to 5? Because the more we practice, the better we get at it and we remember more. You know, those kids knew what they were doing or why they were doing it. It's really important because kids then engage a lot more about in what they're doing. So these are the things, if you're going to do observations of each other or somebody coming in, these are the things people are going to be looking at. So the things that are missing is evaluate and improve your teaching programs and engaging parents and carers in the educative process. They're not part of the learning, the continuum. So the continuum, and everybody got a copy of the document. You want to hold that up? Is that yours, Mandy? Is that it? Yeah. That's the continuum. Because that's, as a leader, I used to have a big A3 too. But I'd take that in and I would take a highlighter as a leader to feedback. And when I was observing, and then you can keep the same document over time, but you won't see everything in a lesson, right? So that's when you're thinking about getting feedback on your practice. Don't think it's going to be a one-off. It should be continuous. And if it's continuous, then it is not so scary, right? Okay? Because, you know, I know some takes a while. If people don't come into your room very often, then it takes a while for teachers to feel comfortable with the principal coming in. We're gone to the days when people put newspaper or big white paper against the window so that nobody can see in their classroom. People have been known to do that so that nobody can have a look as they're walking along the corridor. But, and then if somebody has, if you go into a school and people haven't been in classrooms very often, teachers stop what they're doing and say, "Can I help you, Miss Lowe?" Because they're not used to somebody being in the room all the time.
When you're not in the classroom, or haven't been in the classroom for a while, and it's like, say, I think it's tricky, isn't it, to really cover, or to be able to cover. But for example, when you had a professional review with the line manager, going over those, you don't always, not that you don't cover them, but there are some bits that
there would
no one sees.
There would be some bits, but how can you get that information? Like, how often does your line manager go out with you while you're doing a visit? You can video, right? How often is somebody going out with you to do visits? Do they? Do line manager? Yeah. So there are other ways to do it. I think when you're we're doing support services, you actually have to think a little bit outside the square, and not everything will be covered in there, right? So you need to focus on, well, what is it? What am I key role in my JMP? What does my job and person specification tell me? And what are the key things I need to do? And where do they fit within those standards? Which is why support services, I would say, are more at their lead and highly proficient lead. And so the classroom continuum may not provide you with all the information. So you may be needing to look at highly accomplished and lead, right? But if you're in a classroom, certainly the classroom continuum is the first place to start at.
Feedback in the year, we get that. Sometimes that's valuable too.
But on what basis is the feedback happening, right? And that would be my thing, is that which is why for professional development and performance development, you need continuous feedback, right? We're really good about talking about giving feedback to kids, but we don't necessarily talk about how we give feedback to adults or to our staff, right? And we know that you improve with feedback you improve, right? And so it is that stuff around, it takes time, it takes energy, and I can imagine at the moment, the department's ringing principals every day to find out who's away with COVID and who's not away with COVID and how many letters I've sent out. My brother would say, "Go away, leave me alone, I don't need somebody from the education office telling me." So what time, I want to go out and see what teachers are doing in classrooms, and I'm answering, phone calls from the department. I can say those things now. So when you're using the elaborations for classroom observation, you need to think about with your line manager, or before you see your line manager, say, "Okay, this is what I want feedback on. This is where it fits within the standard." Because don't just go and say, "I want some feedback," because that could open a real can of worms. I want feedback on this area, right? And negotiate the time with your line manager to discuss those areas you want your feedback on. Have that observation, get some written feedback against the elaborations, and then redo and repeat. So it's a cycle. So you go round and round. And you can. That's just an easy to do it that way, right? You can observe each other. You can work with each other around improving practice. We had a teachers observing teachers when I was at Wilsden, and so it costs because you have to pay to release teachers. But we release people in groups of 3, and so they would then negotiate what they're going to get feedback. Something to do normally with the school improvement plan, and then they would be released to negotiate times, what they were looking for, what they wanted to do and stuff, and then they would go and observe each other, and then they would be released to have a discussion around what they saw. So, which is a very valuable tool, because I think we've all learned of each other, and we're all experts in our own right. So that's the continuum, and they're not a checklist. They are statements about what you see in classrooms. The thing why you don't have a checklist is because we had a checklist when we were observing teachers doing guided reading, and this is what we would expect to see in a guided reading lesson. And there were three of us observing this one teacher do it, and she'd go, okay, blah, blah, blah. Now that was number 3. I've done that. she had the checklist, you know, I've done this, I've done that, okay, that was the number 4. Anyway, no, she was just being smart. But, you know, and it was, well, you know, having a checklist, she made sure she covered it, she planned a lesson. And, you know, she was a very good teacher anyway, and so, but she just, I think, was making a point, I think, most likely. But the continuum you will find is in statements as opposed to a checklist. So, I'm going to finish early anyway. Have we got all those questions in there? 27 questions? So, where would you place yourself if you had a look at, you got that one piece of paper, which was focus area 3.2, plan and structure, sequence learning programs. It was something to print on. Hold it, can you hold it up over there? That's how it comes up when you cut and paste. Have a look, I'd have a look, because if you want to look here, you could just go, okay, this is where I think I am, and get me trusted highlighter out. You know, and highlight, this is what I could do, and you could use it so you could do a map, a heat map. So when I just needed tissue, when I was at pardon me.
Claire, while you're doing those, can I say sometimes people are a bit hard on themselves? Because do you remember when we sat down a couple of years back and we had to highlight where we were, and you were really hard on yourself and putting yourself down lower than what she actually could do, and that's where it's really good to work with someone else.
Yeah. No, you could be like the teachers from the lands who put themselves really high because they could see the confident graduates, but most people are much harder on themselves, which is why it's actually useful to get that feedback from a peer or from your line manager. And it's useful to get it continually, because otherwise it becomes this big event, and it shouldn't be an event, right? It should be just...
But also when you do it regularly, you implement it more in your practice. Whereas if you just do it at the beginning of the year and then at the end you go, oh shit, I totally forgot to do, that when that was my goal. And whereas if you do it regularly through each term, it's constantly in the back of your mind.
That's right. So does everybody fill in the performance development form from the department?
Yeah.
And so do you do 2 from your SIP and 1 from your personal? So how do you put the performance development plan? Because there's 3 areas you cover in your performance development plan. What do you do at CleanSIP?
So you've heard this about the question. Whatever you want to. Supposed to work that one done. In my experience at Clemsy, and please interrupt if I'm wrong, but at the start of the year, in week 0, we get together as a group and we talk about PDP.
and we decide which area we need to improve. So following those points and checking ourselves and having a look at that. And then through the term, leadership will visit in the classroom and they'll observe us teach. Or I can go into the office and have a discussion. So I think that happens about once a term, but I'm not entirely sure how often that occurs.
Usually we've got 3.
Brian, you might want to say something different.
Usually we've got 3 goals. So one of them are based on the AATD standards. And then there's another one based on personal goals, like collaboration goals or whatever. And then the third one is about it's an Auslan goal related to the SIP.
So that's what we do, basically.
Is there a fourth one? Or bedrock?
So we used to have a psychology about the 12 steps. We used to work out our personality and how we could improve our personality in teaching.
That's what I meant before, but yeah.
With a questionnaire, like a psychology questionnaire.
Okay, so what do you do at Kilparran?
And then around, term 3 or in the middle of the year, we would do a review meeting. So that was PDP, again with leadership.
We're on the track.
To see if you've achieved your goals or to review where you've got to with your goal. And whether you needed to update your goals with a new goal because you'd achieved it, or whether you needed to continue on that same goal because you hadn't achieved it yet.
Anybody else want to share what they do?
So we don't all do exactly the same, much the same. So we've got 3. So I take one from the elaborations, and then we take one from the best practice guidelines for early intervention, and then we have our own service plan, which is similar to a SIP, a site improvement plan, and we have a goal that relates to that as a team. A team goal.
Yep. So this is support services. I would say that we have a lot of changes in leadership. So often we tell them it's left up to us. So some of us will tell them about the elaborations and we'll probably look at it ourselves and tell them about it. Some people wouldn't at all, I would expect. And I guess it probably really varies because there's all different regions. So how a leadership person might do it, I don't think would be consistent.
Can I add, I've just finished my master's last year and the whole last part of doing my tracks and stuff was 100% based on this. All of my goals were based around this, and so at least they're using that within Victoria University. Manny just gave me leave for everything because I was so
So they're using this for you.
Yeah.
So if you're a mentor teacher, you're kind of giving them a score at the end based on the standards, but the wording is a little different. So it goes like not graduate level and continue up to above graduate level.
Which is useful to know.
As when you're talking about the PDP plans being reviewed, we don't really get once a year, really, or twice a year it's meant to. But
technically, everybody should have their performance development plan reviewed twice a year, because the department expects that, and they send leaders messages all the time.
You get emails, but it's like, and I don't mean any disrespect, but what I've got on paper is actually what I should be working on. Does my manager know that? How it's that involvement, and I guess that's where I have to take the lead and video myself and say, hey, can you watch this and tell me if I'm working towards that goal, and
it's an interesting process, I think, in support services, because I don't know that support services line managers go out and observe people, or, you know what they're doing, or even talk to them about caseload. And I think that's partly to do with people being, they've changed the service, and you've got somebody who has nothing to do with deaf education, managing deaf education staff, who doesn't necessarily know what they're supposed to do, but they might know what the speech is supposed to do, but not what it depends on,
Sorry, Danny, what did you want to say?
I've just got a comment from the chat here as well, come in from Christina. She said, I've generally aligned mine to the AATD or ToD Elaborations, and what I felt I needed to develop loosely aligned to the SIP. So this year was the first year we were more specifically told to align our PDP goals to the SIP, but I still use the elaborations.
What happens at Brighton?
So at Brighton in the past, we have had our PDPs really strictly aligned to our SIP, and they had very mainstream focus. This year that is changing, and in the CDE we are actually going to be putting goals in based on the elaborations. We've got a PD day next term, day 1 of week 1, to be able to go through that and set our goals.
Why are they here? You think we're doing it right now? Choose. Brighton stuff.
And what happens at Kilparran?
Very similar to what Kim was saying, except with the SIP this year, last year, I'm trying to remember when he wrote it. Huge focus on ECC, so the expanded curriculum. We now have, and she's online too, Christina, who's our ECC coordinator. So we're learning lots more than we already knew about ECC, but huge change.
Got another chat.
Yeah.
So Jane here is saying that the SSS line managers are more likely to work with special eds.
That's a comment. And it could be true, but you will find that most schools will expect you to have something to align to your SIP, because it's actually now a department requirement, which is why people would say you have to have 3 goals in your performance development plan. So if you look at the department's performance development plan, it's got the 3 goals. 2 should be aligned to your SIP, because of the fact that we're all going to be a world-class education system. I know I'm in the right time. We're going to be a world-class education system, and to do that, we've got to improve our outcomes in literacy and numeracy. And so the school improvement plan has become a key focus on how schools will do that, and how your SIP is developed, and how your SIP goals are approved. They have to go through your ED to have them approved. But the third one should always be about your personal development. And so you use the elaborations document to help you do that. And so you can heat map these documents. And by heat mapping it, is green is good, I can really do this. A yellow, I've got most of it, and a red is no, I really need more to do more. And that gives you a map of where you're at, but you can change it over time. So it's a tool that if you're going for highly accomplished and lead, you will find that the assessor will actually heat map your work against the continuum, and will actually come in and observe you and then heat map it as well. But they will get your documentation first. 2 people sit down with the documentation, go through it and do individual heat maps. They then meet, have a look at it and say, well, we don't have enough information here and here. So these are the things we're going to ask the person to demonstrate when one of us goes to a service. And so that's what will happen. And it's normally a full day of observation that they do, because the principal's in there, the person comes into observe. So it's quite a long process. It is an intensive process. And to get assessor to be as graded as a necessity, you actually have to do 50 hours of training, which includes watching people teach online and grading where you think they're at. And you have 2 or 3 attempts to grade them, and you don't grade them properly. And it's a national program.
And
See, previously people paid to be assessed.
Yes, except the department, it was $600 to be assessed to get highly company to a lead teacher, and the department was then covering those costs. But so the department covered the cost. But the training, when I did the training in 2017, was non-government schools, Catholic schools, and state schools. So it was combined training. So everybody did the same training, and everybody goes through the same process.
And how aware are all those people of the elaborations?
No, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be aware of the elaborations at all, because what they would say is you need to use the AITSL standards, because that's the agreed documentation across Australia, and that's the documentation for any teacher in any school. The elaborations should fit. So if you're at amateur, or if you're at Linden Park, or if you're working at Clemsic or wherever, the AITSL standards should support. The reason we've got the elaborations is we used to have standards for people. We used to have, I won't call it competencies. Teacher of the deaf competence. Yeah, that's right, yes. Teacher of the deaf competence. Yeah. So the teacher of the deaf competencies, if you're competent, you're competent. That had no barrier. And then we developed them late 90s, early 2000s, and then the AITSL standards were starting to be developed. And so in about 2014, it would have been, we started looking at it, getting rid of the competencies and looking at standards. Because competencies are like, yes, I could jump 5 feet. That's the competency. You can meet it or you don't meet it, sort of thing. Where standards, there's variation and graduation. And so that's why we went to the standards document, and we felt that to support what happens in universities, we needed to have more information there about what teachers of the deaf did. So that's how the elaborations came about. And it goes back even further. So here's the history lesson. Right. 1935. Right? Kids are laughing, right? AATD, NAAT, the Australian Association of Teachers of the Deaf was established. And one of the things that they do, the association used to give an exam to anybody who had worked in a school for the deaf, and you did exams to go up as to be a lead teacher. I found Trudy Smith found an old exam. I'll send it to everybody else because I couldn't find it. But it was, and I got how many of us can answer those questions today?
Don't send it.
Right? So, but it goes back to the fact that if you go to our constitution, it says that to be a teacher of the deaf, you actually have to meet the requirements of you have to have had a qualification that meets the requirements of the association. Well, prior to 1990, and probably 1980, the association set what was taught in the universities. Right. So over time, of course, universities do their own thing. And an association of 300 members doesn't have quite as much power as they did, in their 60s, 70s. Yeah, we can control who comes into the association, but how do we let the universities know what they should be teaching? And so this documentation is there to support that practice. And you've got Macquarie, the old Rennick School, where they use the documentation really closely. And that's probably to do with who has been the head of the school over a very long period of time. So Greg Greg Lee is involved with Rennigan. He established Rennigan, so he's very strong association with the AATD. He came through the system where teachers, he was trained with Des Power. He came through a system where AATD had a very big influence on what happens in the course. So they would be using it. Melbourne Uni has moved right away, and they don't have a teacher of the deaf course or sensory course as such. They have a different name, but they say they cover most.
They used to have music.
I know they did, but it's that stuff around. If you're talking about what happens in deaf education, the world changes as it goes around, right? And so, in the mid-90s and the early 2000s, the mid-90s especially, Melbourne University was a powerhouse in deaf education. But prior to that, it was another one of the universities in Melbourne. And then they set up Rennick College. Right, and so that became the powerhouse. So it just evolves and changes and depends on personalities and, So, and South Australia,
It also depends on influence within the university. Because when I was lecturing in 2018, I made a very clear that, it was utterly ridiculous that we didn't even have maybe 3 or 4 generalised subjects under this topic of being a teacher of the deaf that we had many years ago when I started as teaching the deaf. That doesn't exist anymore. So, anyway, yeah.
Well, when I did that, you had to have a basic and first degree before you could actually do your teacher of the deaf course. You couldn't actually do your teacher of the deaf course without a teaching qualification in the first degree. I know you don't, and I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Well, Chrissy Philippich, an interpreter from WA, she's got qualifications in Japanese. She's very, very, very smart. She's an educational interpreter. And she went and did the ToD. She wasn't a teacher, she was an interpreter. I'm pretty sure she would have done her Auslan, Bachelor of Auslan or whatever that is. And she kind of came along to just learn about it a bit for her own.
But would it become a qualified teacher at the end? She wasn't a teacher at the end of it?
No.
Because the degree doesn't allow you to.
No. But she just did it for her own, because she's a nerd.
And that's, you don't always study to get a working qualification.
So it's speech.
Yeah.
Wasn't there, and
Maybe to improve their interpreting skills.
maybe to improve their educational interpreting skills, if you studied to be a teacher of the deaf, you'd be a better interpreter?
Just to know about the education, because the system is very expensive here. They have ToD, which is at 1 hour a week. That's it.
Depends. Okay, you were going to ask a question?
Do you have my question?
Yeah, it's 5:30, but we'll have time for your question.
Was there, I don't know if I'm on the right track, wasn't there a survey or something, and they gather information about how teachers of the deaf felt they were confident and being that flag, that Aboriginal ear health? So was that a questionnaire that went to everyone, or? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was one of the things that they found was that there were 2 areas that people were not confident with. One was the standard of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teaching, and the other one was around cyber and ICT. So one of the things that the National Association is going to do is put together some training about ICT, particularly cyber safety and deaf kids, and also then look at Indigenous hearing loss and classroom practice, because that's what it actually says, classroom practice. And nobody has yet to come up with really good classroom practice. I've got one more slide over now. I'll just unpin myself. Okay, so I like to move around, Okay, so review your practice again. So continue improving your practice review your practice against the elaborations regularly, use the elaborations for feedback, and I will be getting people to come in and observe you, right? Scary, but it's a good way to do it. Get each other to do it, even if you're actually doing it in your net or your non-instruction time, because it's actually something that you can do in your non-instruction time. And think about the fact that improving your practice is a career-long process. It's not an event and it's never over, right? Otherwise you would have been teaching for 1 year 30 times, okay? So, and working with your peers and line managers can help you to continue your professional journey, okay? It is an important thing to do. Alrighty, thank you. Thank you to everybody for the discussion. And I'm in the wrong place, aren't I?
No, just stay in your spot.
Just down my spot.
So thank you, Claire. I want to say thank you to the interpreters. Thank you for the PD committee. AATD SA is a non-profit organisation. We are volunteers, so please join AATD if you're not already a member. Or also think about joining the AATD Facebook page or accessing information through our new website. Thank you so much, Claire. Well done. And we have a gift for you.
Thank you.
Come to me.